them, different name, different state, delivering to another address altogether.
Turn your mic on.
Right then. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. Let's see here. Are we on? Is it 9? The hour has come. Okay. Last week we talked about the Sixth Commandment. We're going to talk about the Sixth Commandment again today. But look what I have up there, a positive vision. Now, why am I saying that? And the reason I'm saying that is because when there's just very little question that when you look at all the commandments, I mean, I guess other than the first 3 commandments where our society has just totally dropped off the cliff, the rest of the commandments, the 6th commandment is the one where it's just like you have constant problems, constant disagreements with the society in which we live. So it's very easy for me or anybody in my position, or for that matter all of you when we were discussing this, to seem like we are just constantly bashing society for its choices and its immorality and so forth like that. I will once in a while get criticized for why I harp so much on this, and the truth is I don't actually. For a long time I didn't harp on any of this at all, but it's just gotten to the point where our society has gotten where we just can't ignore it. Well, anyway, what do I mean by a positive vision? Well, what I mean is, as Christians, these commandments are not given to us just so that we know what to be against in the society around us, actually. They are given to us as gifts so that we know how actually to live life, and the way life is lived in a rewarding and abundant way, a way that not only glorifies God, but also a way that treats life the way it really should be. So what I want to focus on today is, rather than how society screws up, which is legion, instead to focus on the vision that God would have us have, okay? And to recognize really in an important way what we're giving up. The sexual revolution has cost our society a great deal, and I could go on about the various ways and various things that it now adopts and embraces that are contrary to the Word of God. However, what we're really going to be looking at today is what really has the sexual revolution cost us? What is it giving up? That's the positive side. We're going to look at what we're losing if we go down this road, and what we have to gain in the church by maintaining this. That's one thing that I'd say. Okay? The positive reasons for embracing sexuality as God would have us embrace it. The second thing is to address something that's on everybody's mind constantly, and that is, well, what do we do about this as far as politically goes? And I'd say politically, I think that this is a lost ball game. I mean, I don't think we're going back. I don't personally. If you were to ask me, well, would you vote for something that would reinstate, sort of traditional values and with good solid punishments for those who violate this? And my answer would be, no, actually, I wouldn't. Now, what I would do is I'm going to continue to work tirelessly to try to change society so that one day that's not a no, I wouldn't. It would be, yeah, we can now. The reason why I wouldn't do that is because this is not where society is. I would be trying to impose a law that nobody wants. Well, I shouldn't say nobody wants. We may want it, but the rest of society doesn't. What I would like to do is transform the rest of society so that they would. That's not going to happen. I mean, I'm not going to waste my time worrying about that. What I worry about is the church. I want the church to see and embrace the vision of what God has for us. Our own selves, our own families, our own kids, and our own lives, that's what we need to be focusing on. Okay. You kicked me out, huh? Okay. All right, let's take a look first. Our sexuality and our marriage, what we understand by marriage and family and sex, is a Christian confession. It's a Christian witness. It is a religious obligation, okay? It is not just like, eating and drinking and stuff like that where, we don't really have any special way that Christians are supposed to eat and drink. Christians have their marching orders. We have an understanding of what sex and marriage and family mean and what they're for and what they're meant to protect. And that means that we as Christians must adopt these things to the best of our ability. And when I'm not talking about, everybody sins, there's problems everywhere, but I mean, in terms of as Christians, we embrace this lifestyle as a religious obligation. Have you ever, there's still to this day, once in a while, you will see a large family. And what will you assume about that large family? They're either Catholic or Mormon, right? They might be Orthodox Jewish, but not in Arkansas. Okay. In other words, now, that doesn't mean if you're Catholic you have a big family. If you have a big family, though, it's a good chance that you're Catholic. And that tells us something right there. Why would you make that a comparison? Well, because I think the Catholics have been right about this for a very long. Now, they're right in what they're teaching. They're not right in what they're actually practicing. Your average Catholic parish is no better than the rest of us, frankly. However, in terms of what the actual teaching is that children and big families are good things, and they're a thing to be embraced as part and parcel with your religion. Yeah, I go to church every Sunday, and we have a big family, if God grants it. Okay, so that's one of the things that I would put forward for Christians. Our families are not just whatever happens to be the family unit we happen to be in. They are part of the expression of our commitment to Christ. I think that we need to do much more reclaiming of that. To be perfectly honest, there is very little difference if you just look at family structures. There's very little difference between unbelievers and believers in the United States, with the exceptions that we just talked about. Very little difference. People aren't having kids. They're not having kids outside the church, which is understandable. Sad, but it's understandable. They're not having kids mostly for economic reasons and cultural reasons, because they'd rather pursue other interests than having kids. That's sad. I think they make a very, very bad choice. I think that they are laying the foundation for a very sad and lonely future, but that's their choice. Outside the church, I might expect somebody to make that. Inside the church, it's more perplexing. Why would people inside, why would your average Christian have basically the same size family, the same likelihood of having children as those outside? And that's strange. And it can only be explained by the fact that the church just really hasn't put forward a positive vision for why you would have children because you're a Christian, whereas you might not care if you weren't. By the way, please interrupt me at any point if you've got an observation or you're not sure you agree or you'd like some clarification, because, I can talk. And that doesn't mean I'm necessarily addressing, your concerns. Okay. All of this relates to the sanctity of life. I hope I have made it clear that the fifth commandment is all about the sanctity of life, not just abortion, but the whole thing. The reason why we have an obligation to our neighbor for their welfare is because life is sacred. That also is what's behind all of the sixth commandment, because life is sacred from its beginning to its end, and it is especially vulnerable at the beginning and at the end. And therefore, families are extremely important to care for life. Okay? Now that's vital. So when we talk about the sixth commandment and sexuality, we must not divorce that from the sanctity of life. And that's the basic problem. I mean, our culture has two problems. Number one is they don't recognize the sanctity of life. And number two, even if they did, they disconnect it from sex and marriage. Which, again, let the world go where it's going to go. We can't stop them. But in the church, we've got to be much, much more intentional and proactive, teaching our own children and our own selves what it means to be a Christian. And when new people come into the church, that needs to be a part of, this is what it means. That doesn't mean, culturally being a Christian is very different than not being a Christian today. That's different than it used to be. And it's going to become more and more so. And when people say, I think I'm going to start coming to church, we need to warn them. In a good sense, there's good things here. But that we don't need to be deceptive, and truth in advertising is important. Being a Christian comes with a lot of things that you may not recognize. So before you jump in, be aware. We're not telling you you're not going to rejoice in the end, but we don't want to pull a switcheroo on you, something like that. Okay. Last week I finished by talking about the relationship between the fourth, fifth, and sixth commandment as they relate to life and the intergenerational nature of human existence. And it's a beautiful thing when you think about it, that the fourth commandment really focuses us on the people above us and the people before us that gave us life and enabled life. The fifth commandment focuses on the nature of life as in the image of God itself and the value of the life itself that we have. And the sixth commandment focuses on that which is below and going forward, our children and the next generation. And so we see life flowing to me, from me, and on to the next generation. And this is by God's command. And we need to reclaim that. Again, our culture doesn't look at it this way, and therefore Christians tend not to look at it this way in our culture. And that is, we tend to be all about me and this generation and this present moment, and we don't tend to think much about where we came from, and we don't tend to think much about where we're going. But that is not a biblical way to live. A biblical way to live is always to reflect on what God has delivered to us from previous generations and what we are leaving to the next generation. And the next generation needs our prayers and help, just as we hopefully received the prayers and the help of the last generation. So this is not just about us here and now, but it's our duty to those who have gone before, and it's our duty to those who are coming after, and that we're a part of that. Okay, so it's not like it's all about what's before, what's after. It's also about what's here now. Any thoughts on that? These are very fundamental things, and if you think about them, it's like they're obviously true. I mean, this is not like some great insight here, but it is ignored in our culture. It's just not a part of our culture's thinking. And we are weaker for it, because it's one of the great joys of human life, what we have received and what we are passing on. It's one of the, not just the great joys, but of tremendous meaning. Remember that the Christian church is propagating this way too. Okay? It propagates from generation to generation to generation to generation. And you will find no shortage of places in both the Old Testament and the New that speak of that very dynamic and how important it is for parents carefully to raise and train their children. Yes?
Your opinion or thoughts on why particularly the church, but our Lutheran church, LCMS, are losing the children after confirmation, say, or whatever. Is it because we haven't been teaching this?
Yes. This and other things too. I think that we've been lazy. Now, we haven't done as badly as some, but we haven't done well enough. And why are we losing kids? Well, in part, I mean, you're always going to have a certain amount of parents who just aren't very good witnesses to the faith themselves. But, I mean, even among parents who have gone to church regularly and brought their kids too, they haven't always done a very good job of implanting in their kids the centrality and importance of this for their whole life. Religion is just too much seen as it's an add-on for people who like this sort of thing. You understand what I'm saying? If this floats your boat, then, hey, the church is for you. And if this church floats your boat, I mean, for example, lots of people will be raised up in the Lutheran church, but it's like parents don't put any particular pressure for them to stay Lutheran. But think about that. Why wouldn't you? It's not to say, well, are you saying Lutherans are the only? Well, no, of course not. But I put a massive amount of pressure on both of my boys to remain in the church. By that, I mean the capital C Holy Christian Church. But no small amount of pressure that the Lutheran Church is where you should stay. But it's not like a deal breaker if you end up somewhere else, whereas it is kind of a deal breaker if you end up just leaving the church entirely. But it's not like, well, as long as you're a believer, choose whatever church you like. That's how many parents raise their kids. Well, if that's how you raise your kids, then what are you telling them about the importance of any given? So, because if you denigrate the Lutheran Church that way, what are you also denigrating? Every other church. So if I say, well, Lutheran, good, fine, bad, whatever you want, and then you want to go be a Presbyterian, or you want to be a Catholic, or you want to be a Methodist or something like that, you're saying the same thing about all of them. It's 6 in one, half dozen in the other, and it doesn't matter. What that does is it weakens everybody. People should not leave one denomination and go to another without some pretty careful thought. Now, there may be reasons to do that. So I wouldn't say, just never do that. If you become absolutely persuaded that the Baptists are right and you can articulate why the Baptists are right, then you're wrong. but if you do articulate that, and that is the reason why you're going to change churches, then I would say, well, then you've got to follow your conscience, and I will commend you for that. You will be a better Christian, even so. But if you just drift to the Baptist church because they happen to be closer and you like their preacher, or you go to a community where you just don't like, you move and you just don't like the Lutheran church there. For me, it's like, I don't care whether you like I care, but that's not the reason why you choose a church. But if we raise our kids that way, then we shouldn't be surprised that they get to a certain age and they leave. They go try another church, and then they find out that all the different churches are, theme and variations. They don't know the difference between one and the other, and you know why they don't? Because they've never been taught that it's important. The deal isn't, see, I can say, okay, here's where the Lutherans are and here's where the Baptists are, and these are important differences. That doesn't mean I'm saying the Baptists are all wrong in everything they do, but I'm actually honoring the Baptists by talking about what they teach and believe, and especially since most of it is going to line up closely with what we believe and teach too, so that we can actually say, you know what, it is true that the Baptists are Christians, and so are the Lutherans, and so there is a real sense in which we are in the same boat together, and that's important. And then you can talk about the differences of being important too, because if you're going to switch, that's an important switch. If you're going to go to a church that doesn't celebrate communion and doesn't believe in the real presence, you need to know why that's important. If you don't know and don't care, well then you're weak whether you stay or whether you go. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's how we've been raising our kids. The idea isn't you stay Lutheran or we kick you out of the family. That's not going to help anything. But the thing is, if you are genuine and real and you believe what you do and you do what you believe, then your kids will follow in your footsteps. And if you're a Lutheran on purpose and articulate it and know the difference, then and you communicate that to your kids, then your kids will generally follow in your way. And if they don't, they're going to have their own reasons for doing that, and they might impress you with the level of spirituality with which they decide that they're going to make a change. Although that won't happen nearly so often as it happens now. Okay? Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, I think the church has been very lazy. The church has also been lazy in just allowing the culture to set the tone for what our families are going to look like. They really have. In a shocking way. So let's think about some other things here. Some other positive things that we need to communicate to our own kids, to ourselves, to our nephews and nieces, our aunts and uncles, our own parents in some cases. This is what we're standing for. We're not just against all this immorality out there. We are, but forget the details. This is what we're for, and you can't have them both. You can't have free sex and these things at the same time. So what do we say? Number one, folks, children are a blessing. They are a blessing. Now, everybody will say, yes, they're a blessing. What I mean by that is, they're a blessing even when you can't afford them. They're a blessing even when you don't know where you're going to stuff the next one. they are a blessing. They're not only a blessing if you are all prepared, and if you've got the nursery all set up, and if you've got an income and a job, and you're through school and all of that. They are a blessing always. Now, parents don't always make themselves such a blessing because they sometimes have children when they are manifestly not ready. Then you might ask yourself, well, I mean, if that's the case, then you are not honoring the value of this child by not even having a husband, for example, or a wife. But let's set that aside and just say, children are a blessing. Will they make you poor? Yes. Yes, they will make you poor. They will make you poor and they will enrich you all at the same time. And we Christians have to decide which is more important. I know for myself, and I think most of us here would say, yeah, my children have made me much richer than they have made me poor.
Grandbabies really make you.
But you got to have the kids first, okay? You got to have the kids first. This is a long-term investment, and it is a long-term return. And the truth of the matter is that, kids got to be worth something because there's so much trouble and we keep them around. So that's good. But we don't act this way. We act like, okay, well, we're going to get married and maybe we'll wait until we're 30 to get married, and then we'll wait another 2 or 3 years or 4 years to have a kid, assuming that the finances look good. We just want one. Or maybe 2. But if we have a third, it probably was a mistake, right? That's how people talk. That's how they act. And they are sacrificing the greatest joy in life for a very paltry substitute. But that's what our culture is encouraging. Not lightly encouraging, strongly encouraging. When you have somebody with 5 or 6 kids, what do people say about those families? Sometimes. Irresponsible. It's irresponsible. Sometimes they'll even talk like it's gross. It's awful. Like, what's the matter with you? So are we really, and what do we think about somebody who says, I don't want to have any kids because of the carbon footprint? And I just shrug my shoulders and say, if you are that far gone in understanding priorities, I don't know what I could say to you to help you. Children are a great blessing to the individuals who have them. They are also a tremendous blessing to this world in which we live. Now, this is assuming, we're assuming that we are not only having these kids, but raising them as well, okay? So I'm not just assuming that people who have children and then just take them to the hospital and dump them off there, and it's a great blessing. Maybe it will be. God can do wonderful things. But that is not what his intentions are. And having more and more children, when you don't have a husband, for example, is, again, I'm not going to say the children won't be a blessing then. What I'm saying is that is not God's intention here. So God's intention is that men and women have children and raise them. Life will create, by its very nature, a certain number of single-parent families and a certain number of orphans. It's going to happen. Sad, in this world, it's going to happen. We can handle that. We have to handle that. In the church, we better handle that. But we don't contribute to it on purpose, okay? It's like I tell people, can you live without a right arm? Yeah, many people do. Does that mean I'm going to go chop my arm off because I can live without it? And the answer is no, I'm not going to do that. But if I lose my arm, I'm not going to give up life. I'm going to go forward and learn to live without a right arm. Well, okay, so children are a blessing and they deserve parents. Okay. Sex is more than pleasure. Now, we all know this, but our society does not know this. And too much, we act as though this is the real purpose of the whole thing, okay? And that's why I felt like I was being blunt, even to the point of being almost crude, not crude in the sense of prurient, but in the sense of so mechanical. When I said sex is about children last week, did I say that? Yes. More than once. More than once. And that can sound so mechanical and economic and structural. What about the love? What about and I'm going to say, the love and all that will flow. Okay? But get the foundation right, or the love can be harmed and destroyed when the house collapses on itself. Sex, the unique purpose of it is procreation. In the church, we must never forget that. Now, the Roman Catholics have, for many, many years, said that that means that there should be even no contraception. Now, I will be honest with you. I am much more sympathetic with that view than I am with the view that contraception is not an issue. It's simply a matter of stewardship. I don't know that I would go so far as to say it is per se wrong, but I definitely would not say it is a neutral matter. Whatever a husband and wife want to do, they don't want to have children. I think that needs to be much more carefully explored, the spiritual ramifications of a husband and wife who say, let's not have children. I'm not saying that that's always wrong and no matter what. I'm just saying that most of the time that decision is being made for purely personal reasons, purely temporal reasons, have to do with right here and right now, whether you can afford the children or not, stuff like that. In our culture, sex has been divorced from procreation. It is now a form of entertainment and having fun and personal enjoyment. Christians would say it is very pleasurable and a lot of fun in its proper context. Outside of that context, if it's fun, it's still bad. And the more fun it is, probably the more bad it is, because the more enticing it is for you to continue to do that, which is disordered. It's just not right. Now, let me say again, we are not going to convince those outside the church of anything that I just said. They're still laughing. If anybody watching this, as of that person, they're just shaking their head and say, you guys are off the reservation. I say, yeah, we are off your reservation. That is correct. Furthermore, we are not going to correct this with laws and sanctions. There are two ways that society, for example, let's just say that we were to, how would we employ a strict regimen of chastity on society where we really do enforce this? There's two ways that chastity can really be enforced. Number one, the best way, the way it should be, and that's faith. We practice chastity because it's part of our faith and it honors God, and that's what we do. Okay? So in the church, that should be the guiding principle. It is an expression of our faith in Christ, and that's that. Outside the church, how will this work? Well, you can have enough people with faith that they can have their way with those who don't, okay? And that will work. That used to work. Not everybody had faith, you know. But chastity was such an expectation in society that even people who weren't Christians minded their P's and Q's. You just didn't generally have men and women move in with one another because, well, we're not Christians. But that's not how it worked. We don't care whether you're Christian or not. It's obvious you're not a Christian, but you're not going to do that. We don't have a society like that. We don't have a society that's close to that. I wish we did, because I think society would be better. I don't think there would be more Christians if we did that. But society would be healthier, because what society is giving up is some really good stuff. Okay? But we're not there. We're not going to get there. But in the church, we have the necessary ingredient. We have faith. Now, outside the church, if you don't have enough people with faith so that they just kind of overwhelm the people who do, then how are you going to enforce this? By sheer force of law. Will that work? Well, it either won't work at all, or it will work at such great cost that you'll wish it didn't. Okay? You don't want to do it. So this chastity should flow from faith. We don't force people to be chaste so that they can be Christians. We try to make Christians. And if we get enough Christians, then at least those Christians will practice chastity, and hopefully their children will be raised to value the same things, and that, yeah, it's always going to be a minority of society, but we can live with that. We'll have to. But as long as in the church we at least know what we're doing. Sex is about more than pleasure, and when we make it about pleasure, when we separate it from procreation, we have made a mistake. And that's where the real issue with birth control comes in, and that is that it by its nature is separating the act from procreation. Now we might argue, and we could have an interesting discussion about circumstances where you'd say, but that probably is good stewardship in that situation. So that's why I wouldn't just say no across the board. I would just say, if you're not married, okay, then you shouldn't be having a conversation about birth control. If you're a Christian and not married, you shouldn't be having a conversation about birth control because it should be no part of your life. If you are married, you really shouldn't either unless, and then we can discuss what the unless would be. There are circumstances where, for health reasons, this would not be good, okay?
And the potential parent is incapable of taking care of the child, say mental disability.
Yes, we can think of ways where we can say, and we can even think of situations where reasonable Christians might disagree. As long as we're thinking it through, you're only going to get so far. As long as the necessary connection between sex and procreation is maintained, you're only going to get so far. The problem in our society is it's divorce. And when I say society, with sadness I'd say in the church too. In the church too. If it weren't in the church, then I'm just talking about those outside. But I'm not talking about just those outside. We've got to raise our own children to understand this is what this is for. And when you get married, what you really, well, we'll get to that. We're coming to that next. Marriage is not only about you. Now, once again, our culture, marriage is about you. It's about the person, the people getting married. And typically, each one is about their own selves. But even if we give them credit that they care about the other person, it's still just about that couple. But that is not true. Now, when we look at the fourth and fifth and sixth commandment together, it's obvious that that isn't true. But I've had many conversations with couples who are wanting to get married, and we talk about this. And I ask them, just bluntly, I said, whose business is it whether you get married or not? And the typical default answer is, it's nobody's business but ours. Okay? And then I proceed to tell them, really? Well, is it none of your parents' business? Well, do you want your parents to receive their new son-in-law or daughter-in-law into the family? Do you want them to do that? Or are you just going to force them to do that? Or is it a matter of indifference to you whether they do that? Do you want your parents to recognize your spouse as part of the family? Do you expect them to do that? Do you expect that do you think it's a matter of indifference to your parents whether you have children or not? That's their grandchildren. Does it matter to them? Do they have any business in that? I'm not asking whether you hand over to them the power as to whether you're going to have children or not, or whether you're going to get married or not. Is it their business? And the answer is it certainly is their business. It will be very much your business. When your children are old enough to get married, you will see how much of it is your business, who they marry, or whether they marry, and whether they have children. And you just wait and see whether you have a grandchild, and then the in-law, daughter or son-in-law doesn't like you and doesn't want you to be around your own. I mean, think about that. That's horrifying. Do families come together in marriage? Do you care whether the families of the husband and the wife have interaction with one another or not? And the answer is yeah. You want them to form some bonds together. I mean, it doesn't always work. I understand people are people. But to say that it's none of their business, just you and me, it's just our business? No, it's not. Is it Uncle Sam's business? Do you want Uncle Sam to treat you differently for tax? Maybe you wish they'd treat you better. Okay. What about this? Do you expect your friends to treat you differently once you're married than when you're not? Yes. Yes. You don't want old girlfriends showing up again. Oh, who cares whether you were married? I mean, what difference does that make? Yes, it makes a big difference. You actually do expect your friends to respect the fact that you've got a spouse, that you are a married couple, and then that's different. That we don't invite one and not the other, typically. That they come as a pair, typically. That we respect that fact, that unity between these two people. Do your children, whatever children you may have, is it their business whether you get married? Is it their business whether you stay married? Grandchildren too? Oh my gosh. Huge. Huge. And they have no power in this. Okay? So, just again, common sense, simple logic, and an elementary analysis will tell you this marriage is not just about you. This is an enormously important thing that matters for your families and for the next generation and the generation after that. And for some simple things like, and the previous one, right. Do your parents, is it their business if you get divorced? Yes. And for you just to say, well, this is our business. It is your business. It is not only your business. Just because you have the power unilaterally to do what you want to do doesn't mean you have the right to do whatever you want to do. And you certainly don't have the right to do whatever you want to do without reflecting on how it affects all these other people. Your neighbors care whether you stay married and are happily married. Your neighbors care whether you bear children and actually take care of them and raise them properly. The local school system cares whether you are raising your children or involved in their schooling or not. There's a whole lot of people that care and that it matters and it's their business. So we need to raise our children up to recognize that marriage is not just a personal commitment to two people so that they can feel better. Yes, there's wonderful personal emotions involved and love and all kinds of wonderful things that accrue to a husband and wife and a new family. That's good. But you don't forget that this isn't just about your personal happiness today. But generations from now will be affected by your decisions now, for better or for worse. So we call upon the Lord, and we do our very, very best to, for God's sake and for the sake of all of society, to do our very level best on this, because it's not just us here. Thoughts on this? This is a very positive view. Think about how important it is that a man and a woman should join together and get married. How much more important that is? Well, when a couple says, really what this is all about is my personal happiness, they have reduced the entire thing into something that might only last a few months, right? And because this is what emotions do. And then it's much worse if that's why you're getting married. If you're getting married because of the emotional aspect, you're liable to choose somebody very different. You might choose somebody who's manifestly going to be a horrible husband or wife, but boy, you sure do like being around them. Would be a horrible father or mother, but they sure do make you feel good. You make different choices when you're talking about marriage than we're just talking about somebody who... Remember what I said also last week, that when it comes to personal fulfillment and emotional intimacy and deep and abiding, friendships and so forth, marriage isn't the only relationship that can do that. The unique thing about marriage is that it results in children and families. Okay? If somebody just wants to feel close to somebody else, you don't have to marry them. And that's why it just doesn't hang at all to say, I should be able to marry whoever I love. Actually, that doesn't follow at all. There are lots of people that I might love and should not marry. And there's no insult. They would laugh and say, of course you shouldn't marry me. Of course not. But we can be very, very close. So marriage is not just about the people getting married. Marriage is about family formation, and that's another thing. It's just sort of used to be assumed, that when a man and a woman got married, what was their intention? They're going to start a family at some point. And in fact, that was one of the ways that you just sort of blessed them. May the Lord give you children and not take too long. If you're grandparents, that's what you're saying. But the connection between marriage and starting a family is tight. Now look, this all is in the Lord's hands, right? Not everybody who gets married can start a family. It doesn't always work. But, and so you can have married couples who don't have children, who never are able to have children, or for whatever reason, that's just not, but that doesn't mean that we don't honor marriage as the mechanism by which families are formed, and whether God actually produces a family in this or that instance, that's up to Him. We merely leave ourselves open to the Lord's blessing because, and why will we do that? Because we recognize what a blessing is when we see it. And if the Lord grants it, then He grants it. And if He grants it many times, then we celebrate. And if He doesn't, well then, this will not be the only dream that you and I have had that will not come to fruition because though we longed for a thing and prayed for it, the Lord did not grant it. Yes? And we Christians accept from the Lord both when He gives us what our heart's desire is and when He does not. So marriage results in families typically. I mean, that's the idea. Whether it actually does in a given space, that's a different matter. Owing to the brokenness of the present world, the sexual act does not always produce children, and sometimes can't. And we deal with that the same way we deal with all the other ways in which this corrupt world just doesn't always work quite right. We shoot for the ideal, we live for the ideal, and then we deal with the way that the brokenness of this world doesn't always allow us to live up to that with grace and patience and faith. Now this we need also to raise our children with. Family formation is a higher calling than career. It is sad to say that there are not too many people, I think, that agree with that anymore. A number of years ago, when I was in Jacksonville, I had it was really wonderful and sad. A man and a woman, and they wanted to get married. And the woman, what did she want to do? What did she want to do with her life? She wanted to be a mom. She wanted to have kids and be a mom. It's a beautiful thing. It's not like she couldn't do anything else. It's not like, well, I can't get a job, so I might as well have kids. It wasn't that. This is what she wanted. Now, what was sad about it is, it's so exceptional, I'm talking about it now. Okay? It's so exceptional, I'm talking about it now. Shouldn't be that exceptional. Now, what about a man who says, I want to have kids? Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful thing to say. And that is more important than my getting through school, getting the degree that I want, making the money that I want, or whatnot. That if God grants me this, it is a much higher blessing than should I be blessed in some other ways in terms of education and career and all of that. Family formation is a high calling. It is a higher calling than career. How many people have said that old trope, when you're on your deathbed, nobody's ever going to say, boy, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. Well, I mean, that of course is very hackneyed, but it is also obviously true. Nobody, I hope you don't feel that way. But the blessings that God gives in families, in children and grandchildren and all that are just a wonderful thing. And even if they're not children and grandchildren, being a part of a family where they're not children, they're nephews and nieces and all of that, where you are a part of this beautiful network of people. Family formation is a wonderful thing, and young people should be encouraged to get married and have families. And you'll have your opportunities for career and school as best you can. But do not, in my view, it is not wise to put education and now I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it's defensible, that if you put career and education first and then get to your family afterwards, you are leaving the best for what's left over, and you might never get to it, and even if you do, what you're going to be getting to is whatever's left over. Maybe you have time to have a kid or two. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're spent by that time. Who knows? The thing is, most people would say, well, it'd be irresponsible for you to start a family before you're done with all of this. Well, you know what? You're never going to be ready. And we have to keep first things first. What is life about? What is really going to glorify God? And having children and raising them in the Christian faith is a far more wonderful undertaking than getting a degree and getting a nice job. Recognize that family is the basic unit of our society. It's not the individual, and that's another thing that I think the church has just really kind of fallen down on a little bit, and that is we've bought into what society has. Everything is about individuals. We raise our kids as little individuals, and of course they are little individuals, but they're little individuals that are part of families, and families are they are real. They're not just collections of people that happen to live at the same address. They are real and organic things where we are defined in part by the people we are related to. And we care for one another much more intensely in families. And the government will never be able to substitute for mom and dad, for grandma and grandpa, for aunts and uncles, for brothers, for cousins. They will never be able to substitute for that. But our society has become so atomized that everybody is their own thing. Think about this, for example. A lot of this is economically driven, which means to go against it is going to cost you. How many families do we have where the kids move far away for a job? Now, sometimes you might say, that's necessary, even good. But you might ask, at what price? Because you are paying a price for that, a very high price. To move 1,000 miles away because this job pays better than any job I can get around here. But you are taken away from your family, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts and uncles, where you grew up. There's a big cost to that. And the overall wellness and well-being and happiness of your life may not be served, even though you're making more money there than you would here. Okay? Life being what it is, sometimes a sacrifice like that is called for. Jesus called disciples to follow him and took them away from families. And my going to seminary took me away from where my family was. And you know, if you're going to serve the country, they might send you far away. Who knows where they're going to deposit you? There are reasons why one might do this. But I think too quickly our society says, well, you got to go where the jobs are. You got to go where the money is. And if that's what your promotion means, you have to be transferred to wherever. Well, you got to do that. Not necessarily. And think about the value of family. Think also of the beautiful relationship between the church and family. The church itself is a family. And it is an extended family. And that means that one should never leave a church and nobody misses you. Because if you can leave a church and nobody misses you, that means you were never really there, and that's a problem. There are times when we have to leave churches, but it should be a little bit painful because the church should be close enough to us that it matters. The church is a family. The family is also part of the church. Kids learn about Jesus from their families far more deeply than they learn from the pastor. Husbands and wives can be wonderful helpmeets to one another in walking the way with Jesus, or they can be horrible impediments to one another. The design is that they are helpful to one another, and that it is easier and much more rewarding praying together, worshiping together, sacrificing for the Lord together and being Christians together. And it turns out then that when I pray for this congregation, for this house of worship. But then I also pray for all of our individual houses of worship, that the Lord and His Word and the Holy Spirit would dwell in each of our homes and protect each of our homes from the evil one, and that His Word would dwell richly in each of our homes, and that they would all be little parts of the church that gather together on a Sunday morning. The church spreads family by family by family. It has always been so. And when an individual becomes a Christian, it is marvelous to see how often it is that people related to that individual after a while become Christian, that their children are raised a Christian, that their grandchildren are still in the church. It's a wonderful thing to see that an individual is not just an individual inside the church and outside the church. So to see that. Okay, so here we are. I got to finish now, but once again, there are positive reasons why we exalt marriage and sexual purity and chastity, and elevate this the way we do. The blessings here are many and incalculable. Somebody will say, oh, but you're leaving this person out and that person, and there's this problem and that problem, and all this suffering if we do it that way. And my answer is going to be yes. But you're a fool if you think that abandoning all this, you've gotten rid of suffering and there are no victims. The fact of the matter is, this is tremendous blessings for faithfulness to the Lord, and that He has provided these kinds of blessings to our society is beyond. I mean, you can't gainsay that. That's obviously true. Okay, well, brothers and sisters, let's quit and let's prepare for our worship this morning. Lord Jesus, we thank You for the gift of children and families, for the gift of life, and we thank You, Lord, that You have opened our eyes to see that life is holy and therefore worth all the sacrifices that it demands, whether it's the sacrifices that old age demands or that little babies demand or that simply dealing with other people demands. We pray, Lord, that You would help us to see in our neighbors the image of God, and that we would rejoice in the calling to spend ourselves for the benefit of our neighbor. Amen.